You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on a farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his
Welcome to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that are never, ever going to die. Thanks for joining us once again. Thanks for sharing part of your day with us. And we want to remind you that if you miss an episode, every single episode is archived on YouTube. Just go to the Grace Voto YouTube channel and you will find every single episode. Well, this week, the president is embroiled in, guess what? Another scandal. And I want to share a couple of insights based on my years living in Washington, D.C. The scandal is about the Veterans Administration not working effectively. And, you know, I have to say this. Before I went to D.C., I wasn't quite aware. But as I was living in D.C., everybody, I mean everybody, knows that the Veterans Administration is riddled with problems. This is common knowledge. I emphasize this because this week, a whistleblower in a facility in Phoenix, actually it's been going on for more than a week, a little bit more than a week, but in a facility in Phoenix, he has said that that facility was cooking the books, pretending that veterans weren't on waiting lists so that they would appear to be more effective than they actually were. And as these veterans were waiting for care, it appears that 40 died. And now the scandal has become so big that 26 facilities are involved in this. There's an investigation launched by the government to see exactly what is happening. Has the Veterans Affairs Administration been botching their care of veterans? Are veterans actually dying before they get care? And you don't need an investigation to know the answer to this question. Yes, the Veterans Administration is the second largest bureaucracy in the nation, and it is a mess. Now, I want to tell you, as a young writer in the editorial department of the Washington Times, I was periodically getting these emails from a doctor working within the Veterans Administration. And every day I'd get to work and I'd see this email, and it was just blaring with, there's a problem here, you need to address this problem. And it went to everybody. And he was so consistent and he was so relentless that many of us just thought, maybe this guy's just not normal. And nobody was paying attention to his beef. Well, I went to the editor of the editorial page once and I said, you know, he keeps writing these emails asking us to look into this particular case. Shouldn't we do something about it? And she kind of raised her hand and said, well, everybody knows the Veterans Administration is riddled with problems. Nobody in D.C. wants to tackle this. Finally, when I became the editor of Base News running the military community, I had an assistant with me and I said, you know what? Let me take a look at what this guy has to say. Let me listen to him. Let me bring him in. So I called this doctor up and we flew him in and we interviewed him. He was a neurosurgeon and he was beside himself. So this was in 2009, 2010. So this was years ago. He was beside himself and he brought literally a wagon of documents for me to review. And he was a whistleblower. He said, listen, I have been hired by the Veterans Administration to conduct research into post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm telling you that we are getting government grants and we are not doing the research that we claim to be doing. And when I have reported this to my superiors, they basically told me, just shut up and go away. Are you not being paid handsomely? And in fact, he was being paid handsomely. Well, this doctor wouldn't stop. And he kept persisting that the funds that had been given for the research had to be used properly and not fraudulently as they were. He was fired, and then he was engaged in a lawsuit with the Veterans Administration. And he told me that he had gone from one news organization to the other in D.C. and across the nation saying, "Why aren't you reporting my story?" And some journalists said to him, "You're just talking about what, the squandering of $1 million? That's nothing." And I was appalled at this entire story. But the larger point is, this man who was really qualified in his field, really brilliant in his field, and a person of integrity, he was fired from the Veterans Administration because he wanted to do good work. The media didn't want to touch the story. He was either dismissed as a quack, or there wasn't enough money being wasted for them to think it was a worthwhile story. It took months and months of digging and working with him, and finally we produced a story that ran in the Washington Times. I produced a lengthy interview on his plight. When I asked the Veterans Administration for comment, the only comment they had is that they didn't want to discuss a quote-unquote personnel issue. They wanted him to be perceived as a quack, as a fruitcake, as somebody whose story we should just bury. Well, he is one of many, many whistleblowers. And I'm saying this because I participated in trying to bring attention to the flaws within the Veterans Administration. Anybody worth their salt in Washington, D.C. tries to do this. And the President of the United States knew about this problem with the Veterans Administration. There's no doubt about it. When I say to you that everybody in D.C. knows that the Veterans Administration is ineffective, I mean everybody. So let's listen to now how this president is trying to dance over the fact that he hasn't been doing his job since 2008.
Keep in mind, though, even if we had not heard reports out of this Phoenix facility or other facilities, we all know that it often takes too long for veterans to get the care that they need. That's not a new development. It's been a problem for decades, and it's been compounded by more than a decade of war. That's why when I came into office, I said we would systematically work to fix these problems, and we have been working really hard to address them.
No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. If you call this success, I don't know how you define failure. So now that this scandal has blown wide open with all these whistleblowers coming forward, and by the way, that's another problem we have to address in this nation. We need much more protection for whistleblowers. If you notice, a lot of the whistleblowers get fired, as the doctor I described did, or they can only talk about it after they leave the Veterans Administration. That's another story for another time, but it's something we have to get to. Now the president has been caught with egg on his face, and now he promises accountability. Listen to this.
You know, the responsibility for things always rests ultimately with me as the President Commander-in-Chief. Rick Shinseki has been a great soldier. He himself is a disabled veteran, and nobody cares more about our veterans than Rick Shinseki. So, you know, if you ask me, you know, how do I think Rick Shinseki has performed overall? I would say that on homelessness, on 9/11 GI Bill, on working with us to reduce the backlog across the board, he has put his heart and soul into this thing, and he has taken it very seriously. But I have said to Rick, and I said it to him today, I want to see, you know, what the results of these reports are, and there is going to be accountability. And I'm going to expect, even before the reports are done, that we are seeing significant improvement in terms of how the admissions process takes place in all of our VA healthcare facilities. So I know he cares about it deeply, and you know, he has been a great public servant and a great warrior on behalf of the United States of America. We're going to work with him to solve the problem, but I am going to make sure that.
Wrong answer, Mr. President. What the American people want to hear is, Mr. Shinseki, come into my office, sir, fired. The next person under you, sir, fired. Start firing people. He speaks so much, our president does, like an academic. Oh, Mr. Shinseki put his heart and soul. Who cares if you put your heart and soul into it? We want to see results. The veterans require, need, demand, should have results. They should have the best care in the world, bar none. And it doesn't take another long investigation to get to the bottom of this. Accountability. I don't think our president understands what the word accountability means. He just thinks if he says it, Americans believe, oh, yeah, sir, you're on it. No. Accountability means people are fired, a new staff comes in, and the problem is fixed. That's how we do things in America. I know that's not how things get done in the third world, where problems are endemic and problems are systemic and problems are never fixed. But here in America, people get fired immediately for failure and problems get fixed. That's how America used to be run. Well, it appears that our president doesn't know about what's going on. Every time a scandal erupts, he says that he heard about it on the front pages of a newspaper. And so the Republican National Committee has rightly decided to spoof him on his ignorance.
Just lastly, this criticism of his management style, is he too detached from some of the nuts and bolts of running the government, running an administration?
Well, I know that's
some
what
of these
Republicans
issues.
mean. When did he know that piece of
When
information?
it came out in the news.
Everyone knows, the president did not know about this tactic until he heard about it on through the media.
Do you know when he first knew that there was a problem?
Well, I think it became clear fairly early on, the first couple of days. That
So not before that, though? Not before October?
And other than press reports, we have no knowledge of any attempt by the Justice Department to seek phone records of the Associated Press.
Well, let me take the IRS situation first. I first learned about it from the same news reports that I think most people learned about this. I think it was on Friday.
If you mean the specific allegations that I think were reported first by your network out of Phoenix, I believe we learned about them through the report.
Well, it's not true. It's not true at all. His claims that he learns things from the news media are completely false. We know for a fact that his transition team was briefed, was given detailed briefings on the problems within the Veterans Administration. That's a memo we now have, and we know for a fact that he knew specifically in 2008. So he didn't hear about it from the press. And by the way, even this phony line that he's saying that he first heard about it from the press. The press, CNN has reported on this already for almost a year. The LA Times has reported on problems within the Veterans Administration previous to this. So the press, even if you want to go down that road, you can see that he's lying. This specific scandal, he's claiming he just heard about it, but the problems within the Veterans Administration have been documented within the bureaucracy, to his transition team, and in the press way before the last couple of weeks. So he's lying. That's just a cover story. He knows about the problems, but he's incompetent. I've been saying that now for the last 5-6 years. The man is simply incompetent. He cannot do his job. He cannot perform in the task that he was elected to perform. Sarah Palin has a take on why he seems to not get it right.
Accountable.
Well, a couple of reasons. One is when you hold someone accountable, it takes some energy and resource, and Barack Obama is lazy. In fact, he warned us that he was lazy, and he attributed that to having been brought up in Hawaii. It's his words, not mine. And another thing is that Barack Obama still doesn't see what the main problem is. The main problem is government. It's not the solution, like Ronald Reagan said. It is the problem. He doesn't recognize that, so he will continue to do what he's doing. Status quo is fine with him. He's not called out as often as he should be because the media, as formerly the referee in this, again, game of politics, isn't doing its job in holding him accountable.
Well, you know what the news for the president is? This time, even Democrats have to hold him accountable. And it's not enough to say you didn't know. It's not enough to say that the problem isn't fixed, because our veterans deserve a heck of a lot better. And on this one, there is a groundswell of anger and frustration and a cry that our armed forces, when they return injured, battered, and bruised, we must demand the best and greatest care for them. You're listening to Dr. Grace telling you you're not crazy, liberalism is.
I know what I was feeling, but what was I thinking?
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to be with us. I hope that this show helps you get your chores done a little bit easier, allows you to drive those kids to some kind of an event with a little bit more interest and amusement, or perhaps even greater than all that, I hope that this show helps to create a community of fellow believers. You know, there's an old world saying that if you would see pennies dispersed, 100 pennies dispersed, each of them would appear to be insignificant. But if you grouped 100 pennies into the palm of your hand, then you have power, you have a dollar, you have things that you can do with that. And so I hope that this show is the grouping together of like-minded people who see that, hey, you're not crazy, the world is crazy. You haven't failed your society, your culture, your government is failing you. There is power in that knowledge, and there is power in congregating together around those themes. Well, you know, I am really refreshed. Last week was Mother's Day. I had a great day with my children. My husband and I went to a park, and he gave me the great honor of having my pint of Haagen-Dazs all to myself. But you know, it led me to think about my own mom. And before we get rolling on today's show, I just want to share something of importance. I lost my mom in 2008. She died after battling oral cancer. And I have to say, my mom is the single greatest person I have ever met. I delivered her funeral oration. And when I did so, years later, I also wrote it all down. And I published it on my website. It's called Ode to a Great Christian Lady. And I'm sharing this with all of you because I've written hundreds and hundreds of articles. But when I'm at an event, when I'm in a public place, even among friends and family who have read all my work, people will come up to me and they'll say, you know, I really enjoy your articles, but the article I love the best is that you actually wrote down the funeral oration that you delivered about your mom and her virtues and the impact that she had on everybody's life around her. And people tell me this, whether they're young moms or older moms, and I encourage all of you to read it. Some of them say, I want my daughter to read it. And the reason that it has this impact is because of the strength of her character, the lessons that she taught, the beauty of the person that she was, the example that she set for all of us. So check it out. It's called Ode to a Great Christian Lady. You can just Google it with my name. It comes up quite easily. And that is my tribute to my mom, the single greatest person I have ever known. It was her deep faith that essentially lifted up the entire family and has shed a bright light for her three daughters throughout our entire lives. Well, you know, speaking about Mother's Day, Planned Parenthood on the day after Mother's Day, issued a fundraising letter asking people to send in money because, as the fundraiser was requesting the funds, she was saying that, mothers need to be empowered to make choices around the world. So Planned Parenthood, of all organizations, was trying to exploit Mother's Day. Can you believe it? To raise money? I mean, they are the anti-Mother's Day organization. It occurred to me as I was reading that fundraising letter that the woman that was issuing it, she wouldn't have been around. She wouldn't even exist to send that letter if her mother hadn't made the choice to give birth to her, which is the opposite of what Planned Parenthood is doing. There is an abortion committed in the United States every 96 seconds. Can you believe that? Every 96 seconds, a mother decides to terminate a life. That is an atrocious statistic. And I was just appalled that Planned Parenthood would use Mother's Day of all days to try to raise money. In fact, we should continue to push for the complete defunding of Planned Parenthood. They get over $500 million in government funds. And that really is $500 million coming out of our pockets for abominable activities. Speaking of women in the spotlight, well, you've got this week Hillary Clinton all over the news once again. And the question being asked is, does she have brain damage? Those are words that were issued by Republican consultant strategist Karl Rove. He said, this woman is getting up there in years. Her health record should be examined, especially in light of the fact that just before Congress asked her to testify on Benghazi in 2012, she suffered, by her own admission, a brain injury. Listen to Karl Rove.
Where'd that come from?
No. Wait a minute. No. I didn't say she had brain damage. She had a serious health episode. And my point was that from, I think it was the 7th of December in 2012 through the 7th of January of 2013, she underwent, first she had apparently a serious virus. They announced then on the 15th of December that she had, at some period in the past a week, fallen. They didn't say when. They didn't say where. She was recovering at home. On the 30th of December, she goes in and turns out to have had a blood clot. They won't say where. The next day, they say it is between her skull and her brain behind her right ear. She's in the hospital for 4 days. She goes home, is back in the office on the 7th. And testifies on the 25th wearing special glasses that allow her to deal with the double vision that this episode caused. My point was that Hillary Clinton wants to run for president, but she would not be human if this didn't enter in as a consideration. And my other point is this will be an issue in the 2016 races, whether she likes it or not. Every presidential candidate is asked for all of their health records by the New York Times. They turn them over to and vice presidential candidates. They turn them over to a battery of doctors, and they examine them in detail. And my point was that everybody says she's going to run, and she probably is. But I would bet it's a more complicated calculation than we might think because, look, she'll be 69. By the time of the 2016 election. She will be 77 if she serves 2 terms, and this ends up being an issue. I would remind you, John McCain, here's the headline from U.S. News and World Report. McCain's age and past health problems could be an issue in the presidential campaign. This happens every presidential campaign.
Okay. I have to say, this is just common sense. Of course, when you're in your late 60s, regardless of whether you're running for public office or not, health becomes a major consideration in everything that you do. I just want to give you a small example. I was talking to my father-in-law shortly after his wife passed away when he was in his late 60s. And he was saying, from moment to moment, from day to day, from year to year going forward, I'm fully cognizant that anything could happen to me. So I'm just going to try to enjoy my life as much as I can. But these are his words. I really don't expect to live much beyond, age 75. I mean, that's what he told me quite candidly. Of course, I'm on the phone here listening to him, trying to console him after his wife died, saying, oh, come on. Please don't talk about another death. But what I want to point out is that it's just normal. She's 66 now. She's going to be 69. Of course, health is a major consideration for her family, and for the electorate as we weigh this. And unfortunately for my father-in-law, it seems to be what he said was prophetic, because now he's in his early 70s. And just a couple of weeks ago, we called him and he said there's something wrong with his hand. There's something wrong with his leg. There's something wrong with the right side of his entire body. And he's going to go find out what that is. It's not moving properly, and he's suddenly stuttering. So we don't know what happened. I mean, that's literally what we all face in our declining years. Things can happen very, very quickly. That's just reality. And when we talk about a presidential candidate, it's obvious that we're concerned about that person's health. It's an extremely strenuous job. The campaign itself is strenuous, and the job is extraordinarily difficult, and it requires a tremendous constitution. So Hillary is going to have to answer questions about her health. And of course she does, all the more so because she's the one that raised it. When she, that whole story about she bumped her head and all that, I always thought it wasn't true. I never really believed that it was true. I always thought it was a delaying tactic not to testify on Benghazi. She was compelled to do so nonetheless. And now we're going to find out, was that really an illness? And if so, the full details must come out. And we have to ask questions because there's a discrepancy. The State Department said she was well and ready to go within 30 days. But Bill Clinton, in a recent interview, said that she had to work really, really hard to recover, and it took her 6 months to recover. Whoa, what's going on here? I mean, they got to get their story straight. And we're totally right to ask questions about it. Bob Dole, Ronald Reagan, John McCain, all the Republicans were asked a gazillion questions about their health. And this story for Hillary Clinton is not going to go away. Well, Pelosi had the gall and the stupidity to actually say that raising the issue is somehow vile, evil, and that this whole thing is going to work to her advantage. Listen to this.
I think that Hillary's strength, her popularity, the prestige she enjoys, has driven the Republicans to their wits' end. That's what I think. I think what he said is just, only makes her stronger.
Yeah, everything makes her stronger. Remember last week we were discussing the Monica Lewinsky story, the affair that Bill Clinton had Monica Lewinsky. People from MSNBC were saying, oh, this only makes her stronger. So the woman had a concussion, fell, hit her head, multiple days in the hospital, 30 days out of commission according to the State Department, 6 months out of commission according to Bill Clinton. But that only makes her stronger. Well, she's got a lot of support out there amongst Democrats. And that support, I've been saying the whole time, is weak. We can punch holes in it. Recently, you had a reporter on the campus of George Washington University who went around talking to young people. And the first part of the interview, they're all saying, oh, yeah, we'd love to vote for her. We'll be the first woman ever elected to high office. This would be fantastic. We've got a first black president ever. Then we're going to follow it up with a first woman. This will just be great. So the first half of the interview, all these young folks are saying that they're so excited about a Hillary presidency. And then the second part of the interview, the reporter asks, well, what are her achievements? And this is what they said.
I'm not really sure. I'm not that into politics.
I don't know. It's a tough question. I don't know. I really don't know.
Definitely not the Benghazi ordeal.
Don't say
right?
Whoa. I have no clue.
There's just so many. Just the fact that she's been such a world leader and just recognized all over as doing so many great things. Like, I don't even know that I could pick a single accomplishment.
Her soft power approach, I think, was a very big and positive contrast to the previous 8 years under the Bush administration, and I think really, gained America's credibility abroad and was very positive for the U.S. in general.
As Secretary of State, she has just done a great job in not letting things deteriorate. Honestly, I'm not very up to date with politics, but I know she hasn't made a major mistake, and that would definitely be an accomplishment.
What do you think is her greatest achievement as Secretary of State?
Well, she didn't have that many before she gave up that role.
And the way she handled Benghazi was remarkably adept at international affairs, so I really respect her for that.
So you think probably Benghazi is one of her best accomplishments?
I mean, no accomplishment is without fail, but I think that it ranks pretty high up on the level of emergency that it presented and how well it was handled. So yeah, I would definitely say that Benghazi is her high point.
Well, you can see how well these students are faring at George Washington University. You can see the quality of their education. Hillary Clinton is going to go on a book tour where she is detailing her quote-unquote hard choices. That's also the title of the book, where she's going to explain all of her achievements. And you know what they amount to? One huge zero. There are no achievements as Secretary of State. She is the Kim Kardashian of politics, famous for being famous. You're listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that will never, ever die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna work harder. I'm a survivor. I'm gonna make it. I'm a survivor. Keep on survivor. I'm a survivor.
Talk about one tough cookie, one survivor, one fighter. It is Barbara Walters. She has retired after a very long career, and everybody has been bidding farewell. I watched her 2-hour special, Barbara Walters, Her Story, and many, many times I was really impressed with her. And I am impressed with her. You know, I learned a lesson as a young girl reading literature. I once read a piece by Thomas Mann, and I did a lot of research on him. He's a great German author in the first part of the 20th century. And he taught me to look for what you can admire. And with Barbara Walters, there's lots that we can sit here and criticize. But you know, there's a lot that we can admire. And I want to get the criticism out of the way so that I can focus on what I admire about her. When we talk about Barbara Walters, we are not going to say good wife or good mother. And that's by her very own admission. I mean, this woman was married 4 times, twice to the same man. She has said that she wasn't a good wife because her first priority was always her career. And she adopted a girl called Jacqueline. And she has also admitted that her biggest regret is that she wasn't around for her little girl. She wishes she had spent a lot more time with her little girl. So good wife and good mother, that's not going to be part of her obituary, that's for sure. And she's also a libertine. I mean, she's had so many lovers. I mean, I lost track. I started to count and I just said, just forget it. This is a promiscuous woman. The word chaste is not a word we're going to ever associate with Barbara Walters. Okay, so that's the bad part. But the good part, I mean, she truly is a tough cookie. She was a pioneer in an industry that I think, as I've told you, is riddled with chauvinism even to this day, let alone when she was trying to make it. And she truly broke barriers. She was the first woman ever designated as a co-host on any show. She was the first female co-anchor of a newscast, even though it didn't succeed. And even more than that, she created a new brand of journalism, a new brand of TV journalism. She created the personality profile, the ability to get a scoop, interview an individual, and really in a few minutes, whether it be 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, get to the heart of who they are. And that's very difficult to do. I can tell you this as a journalist. It's very difficult to get high-profile people to sit down and be interviewed. And even when they do agree to be interviewed, it's extremely difficult to get them to be sincere, to have sincere moments with them. And what I most admire about her is how diligent she is, how much attention she devoted to her craft. At one moment during that special, she talked about how she prepares and she does extensive research before she meets a person to interview. And then she writes questions on a card, and she'll spend hours and hours rearranging those cards and trying to figure out the right sequence of the questions. I admire her devotion to her craft. And that's really why she rose. She refused to give up. She worked hard despite all the barriers, and she became truly a television legend. And I have to say this, her personality profiles are very interesting. Even to this day, I think she asked great questions, and she managed to get people often to open up their hearts. That's a gift that she had. And I think that if we talk about the two greatest women in television journalists of our lifetime, they are truly Barbara Walters and Oprah Winfrey. I'm much more critical of Oprah Winfrey than I am of Barbara Walters, because I think that Barbara Walters was able to conduct an interview while remaining in many cases objective in her interviewing. She asked good questions, and she didn't necessarily do what Oprah does, which is being such a partisan for breaking down cultural barriers. And Barbara Walters, too, succeeded in interviewing not just celebrities, but she interviewed leaders, great leaders around the world, from Castro to Margaret Thatcher to presidents. She interviewed every sitting president. That's a heck of a feat. I don't know of many journalists who have interviewed as many presidents as she has, even the ones that I truly respect. So we're going to devote a little bit of time to what makes Barbara Walters so interesting and so great, why I personally like her. And one of the things that I really like about her is when you read her biography, you realize that the heart of her drive, at the heart of it all, is that she had a father that was unsteady in his profession. So he could make a lot of money and he could suddenly blow all that money. And she revealed that she knew that sooner or later she would have to support her mother, her sister, who was not capable of taking care of herself. She was mentally challenged. And her father, too, because she perceived that he always went from boom to bust. So at the heart of the drive that she had was this sense that ultimately she was going to have to provide for the whole family. And what I admire about her is that she was always able, no matter everything that was going on around her, no matter how difficult the barriers that she had to break down, she was always able to find an opportunity to succeed. Listen to her story in her own words.
For many years on the Today Show, they had one female writer out of something like 7. And the only way you could get the job is if that female writer got married or died, and they would then hire one other female writer who would do the female pieces, the fashion shows, the celebrity interviews, what I call the tea-pouring interviews. So I did that. Every, quote, Today girl had been a model, an actress, and that's what they looked for. I never thought it was going to be me. I was too serious. I didn't speak that well. I was from Boston. I didn't pronounce my R's. I wasn't beautiful. I was, pert? You know, so they put me on for 13 weeks, and I stayed on for 13 years.
You know, she turned a closed door into a new genre. She basically took the big no that had been slammed into her face. You can't do this as a woman. We're not going to allow you to do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to allow you to do the hard news. We're going to allow you to do something else. And she took that and she made that into something original and fresh and a new genre that ultimately overtook the traditional newscast. That is remarkable achievement. And what's even more impressive about her is that sometimes she failed and failed miserably. But she found a way to bounce back. Listen to this.
I have a new colleague to welcome. Barbara?
Thank you, Harry. Here was this new opportunity. They told me that the news was going to be an hour. They told me that I could do interviews.
And our newsmaker interview tonight by satellite is with the President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat.
Anything that I had wanted, and it could only go up. Well, that's not necessarily so. It can also go down. I was so lost and miserable when I came to ABC. When I think about it now, it's taken me years not to get tears in my eyes. I was so lonely. I was a co-anchor with a man, Harry Reasoner, who couldn't accept me. I would walk into that studio, and Harry would be sitting with the stagehands, and they'd all crack jokes and ignore me. And no one would talk to me. It was so lonely, and I was failing, and I read about it in every paper and magazine. One had a headline, "You're a flop." And when I saw the person who had written it, and I said, "This is so painful," he said, "Well, you are a flop." This is when I worked my hardest and did probably the best interviews of my life, the joint interview with Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. I did a huge interview with Fidel Castro, little by little working my way back. And the letters that I got were what saved me. If you can do it, we can do it. Hang in there. We're having the same problems. The idea that women in all different fields, whether they were just beginning an industry or whether they were lawyers where there was the glass ceiling. At that point it wasn't glass, it was steel. Or in any aspect of their lives, they understood what I was going through and they were with me.
Well, you know, she kept working, and even though her failure as a co-anchor of the evening news was so public and so painful, she bounced back. That is extremely admirable. And if you look at all the footage of those years, you see Harry Reasoner, her co-anchor. I mean, the disdain on his face, it's painful to watch. He looked at her with utter contempt. She describes her loneliness, all the barriers that she was overcoming. What I also find very admirable is how she's breaking down these barriers, but she always looked a lady. She's always extremely well put together. She has grace and femininity in how she dresses, how she carries herself, how she speaks. Very, very admirable. You know, she gave an interview to O'Reilly where he asked her point blank how far we've come and whether or not there's a war on women today. Listen to her response.
Is there a war on women in America? I mean, you're one of the top women.
I don't think so.
Okay, no war on women, right?
I don't think so. And somebody asked me recently, was I a feminist? And I thought, it's an old-fashioned word now, feminist, because with rare exceptions, women can do and do whatever the men do.
All right, good. I'm glad you say that, because I think that's the biggest phony issue I've ever heard. Do you have any resentment against men? And I say that because Harry Reasoner gave you a hard time. Some of the other boys, the old journalist people, they were derisive toward you. When I worked at ABC, I heard bad things about you. And I said, man, I never saw it myself. But do you have any resentment against male colleagues? Did they hurt you?
No, I didn't like some of the things. I had to fight against them. I think there was still the old school of hard news, and it should be men. But that's gone. I like men. I enjoy being with men. I don't have a problem, and I don't have resentment.
Okay. Because Jennings thought you were a little softball. You know that, right?
Peter was his own piece of work, as we say.
I had access to Jennings, and I used to say, look, what are you giving her a hard time for? All right? She's going out, she's getting information from these people, and that's what you want, information, right? Then he told me to shut up and get out of his office, all right? But, I mean, I saw it firsthand. But you telling me you don't have any resentment against these guys?
I don't have time for a lot of resentment. My time was spent doing my homework, trying to ask the best question, trying to get the big get. I didn't spend a lot of time saying, why does he do that to me, and I'm going to get even. I don't think that way.
Okay.
That is really remarkable. I got to tell you, as somebody in the newsroom, I saw so many fights, intergroup fights. I saw so much mistreatment of people, and resentment was everywhere. Everywhere, whether it came to positions, whether it came to people feeling that they were mistreated, people feeling that they should have got a promotion that they didn't get, people feeling that their stories were... resentment was a key aspect of being in the newsroom. It was everywhere. In fact, I got to confess, it even poisoned my heart. I felt resentment towards upper management for so many things. I admire her that she says she didn't have time for resentment. And if you think about the results of that, not harboring that resentment in her heart, Harry Reasoner, her co-anchor, had visible resentment against her. And do we even know who he is? Do we even know? I mean, I don't even know who this guy is until I read the biography of her and looked at the footage. Nobody remembers Harry Reasoner, and he thought he was so superior. And everybody knows Barbara Walters. She buried the humiliation, and she ignored his mistreatment of her and just kept doing her job and did her job brilliantly, to the point that she's the one that has had the long career. And we don't even know who this clown is anymore, Harry Reasoner, who so mistreated her. I really admire her for this attitude of no resentment, and also for her frank analysis about today. There is no war on women, because women can do everything. And as she said, they do everything. I know that my parents had big arguments in the 70s and 80s about their children. And one of the things I so admire about my mom, who was a woman that came from a small village in Italy, she went toe-to-toe against my patriarchal dad, and she would say over and over again, my children will do everything I didn't do. And by God, we have. And it's because of women like Barbara Walters, women like my mom, and all the women out there who broke barriers down, that we can do everything, and we do everything. You're listening to Dr. Gray, speaking truth to power.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace, upholding values that will never die. Well, you know, that's Kelly Clarkson singing Because of You, and I think that is probably the best song that I've ever heard, which chronicles the long-lasting effects of abuse. Abuse by an older person on a young one. Well, this week in the news, another dreadful, dreadful story. You know, when historians are going to write the history of our times, they're going to have to note that one of the great filmmakers of our time, Woody Allen, was accused of molesting his own daughter. And one of the great pop singers of our time, Michael Jackson, has been accused multiple times of being a pedophile. This week, an absolute bombshell story. James Safechuck. He's now 36 years old. He appeared with Michael Jackson in a 1988 Pepsi ad. He says that he was abused by Michael Jackson from the age of 10 to 14. And this man now joins two others who are on the record for saying that Michael Jackson is a molester of children. There was 13-year-old cancer survivor Gavin Arvizo and Wade Robson, now a 31-year-old man. So we have three individuals who have come forward. Now, this boy, then boy, when he was a boy between the ages of 10 to 14, he says that he was repeatedly molested. And in his case, his accusation is very powerful because there are witnesses that are going to be called and they will corroborate it. There was a maid who saw him in bed with Michael Jackson, and they were both naked. There was also a caretaker on the grounds who is going to be a key witness, who has evidence of, or who was a witness to the molestation, who actually saw Michael Jackson fondling the young boy. Now, I've got a couple of questions here on this story. This man now, Mr. Safechuk, he's married, he's got 2 children. The key question everybody is asking is, well, why now? Why are you coming forward now? Michael Jackson is dead, and you should have come forward in 2005 when that 13-year-old cancer survivor, Gavin Arvizo, had Michael Jackson on trial. If you had come out as a witness, there would have been a conviction there. But he had declined to come forward at the time, even though prosecutors were pressing him to do so. So people are asking, well, why now? I mean, is this credible? Is this man driven by greed? Does he want money? He's suing the estate, so obviously money is involved. But what's his primary motivation, and why the timing? Well, look. In this guy's defense, in 2005, he would have been still just a 25-year-old man. He would have been so much younger than he is right now. He's 36 now, and there is a difference in perspective between being 36 and the age that he was in 2005, in his 20s. I mean, by the time you have your own children and you process everything that's happened to you, and also you're much more established in your own life, there's a lot more reason for you to come forward for the right reasons. So I wouldn't say that the timing necessarily speaks against his credibility. But one of the key questions to ask is, how on earth did the parents not notice, didn't protect this boy from Michael Jackson? Apparently, as a young boy, this kid went on tour with Michael Jackson. He was alone with him repeatedly. And what's the most shocking thing of all to me, I mean, I'm asking the question, where were the parents? This is a small sample of how the kid obviously idolized Michael Jackson at the time. The ad actually depicts a slice of reality, how so many children idolized him. Listen to this.
Mr. Jackson?
Looking for me? 感動は時代を変える。Pepsi New Generation.
So as Michael Jackson was on tour in 1988, James followed him around the world. He followed him in Paris, in Los Angeles, and in London. And he was apparently victimized dozens of times. And the Mail Online is reporting that as a result of this lawsuit, there's going to be other victims, apparently dozens more victims of abuse who are likely to come forward and to share their accounts of being molested. I mean, how sick is this? Michael Jackson literally could have had any woman that he wanted, and as many as he wanted. And if he, wanted to go the other way, he could have had practically any man and as many men as he wanted. But he had to go for the children. The children. And if you look at Woody Allen, too, you got to ask yourself, one of the most powerful men in the history of cinema, the greatest director of our time, and yet the temptation is the children. What does this say about the art in our society? There's a question that I used to debate in college. Do you assess the man by his work or the work by the quality of the man? Well, we got to ask ourselves this question. The culture we know is constantly causing degeneration. And when we uncover the people behind the culture, we discover that they are perverted. I mean, there's just no other word to describe, and they're demonic. This behavior is nothing short of demonic. Now, Michael Jackson is a very sympathetic person overall until you discover this. I mean, if you know the history, his biography, he was in an abusive environment. He had a really stern, difficult father who basically deprived him of a childhood. And so you can sympathize to some extent with this person who grew up wanting his childhood, wanting it back somehow. And that's why he created things like Neverland and just loved everything about the world of childhood. And I mean, I know people like this. If they've had great suffering or trauma in their childhood, they love everything childlike, Disney and all that stuff. And that's fine because that can be healing. But obviously he crossed the line into replicating the abuse on children, not loving them. You know, to his defense, when he was on trial, he would come out with public statements saying he would never do that because he loves children too much. You know, this shows us that if you're looking at the king of pop and the king of film, and what we discover about them is that they want the children, they crave the children, they are turned on by children. Our culture is being driven, our art forms are being driven by demonic impulses, by people who cannot control their demonic impulses. And this also shows us that lust is just insatiable. You now have a society where you can have any kind of sex with whomever you want. And it's everywhere, on the internet, it's in real life. There are no bounds, there are no barriers, and still it's not enough. And that confirms the age-old understanding. Lust is insatiable. And that is why it constantly it devours everything in front of it, including the most innocent, which are our children. The end point of all this is they are after the children. They are after the children's minds. They are after the children's souls. And we know that they are even after our children's bodies. This is the lesson to be learned from this. Protect your children with all of your strength because they are the target of the most demonic forces in our society. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that will never, ever die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.